The world of survival horror was forever changed in 1996 when a small game called Resident Evil introduced players to the terrifying secrets of the Spencer Mansion. Since then, the franchise has grown into one of the most iconic in gaming history, spanning countless sequels, remakes, spin-offs, and even movies. From the haunted corridors of Raccoon City to the global conspiracy of bioweapons, every game in the series has built upon a legacy of fear, suspense, and unforgettable characters. In this series, we're diving deep into the history of every Resident Evil game, from the original classics that defined survival horror to the modern remakes and experimental spin-offs that push the series in new directions. Join us as we explore the development, stories, and innovations behind each title and discover how Resident Evil became the legendary franchise it is today. In 1996, Capcom released a game that would forever change horror gaming. A game that redefined fear, tension, and storytelling in a way the world had never seen before. This is the story of Resident Evil, the original survival horror classic that started it all. It all began in the early 1990s. Capcom developer Tokuro Fujiwara wanted to create a modern remake of his 1989 horror game Sweet Home, which was based on a Japanese horror film. He handed the project to a young designer named Shinji Mikami. Mikami took inspiration from classic horror movies like The Shining and Night of the Living Dead and focused on one goal: to make players feel fear. Development began for the original PlayStation, which was still new to the gaming world. Mikami and his team experimented with early 3D graphics, using pre-rendered backgrounds to make the mansion feel detailed and claustrophobic. They called the game Biohazard in Japan. But in the United States, due to a copyright issue, it was renamed Resident Evil, a clever nod to the haunted mansion setting. Players could choose between two characters, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, both members of STARS, an elite police unit investigating strange murders in the Arklay Mountains. They soon discover the truth: a secret underground lab owned by the Umbrella Corporation, responsible for creating the deadly T-virus. The infected roam the mansion, zombies, mutated creatures, and biological experiments gone wrong. With limited ammo, puzzle solving, and fixed camera angles, every corner felt dangerous. Resident Evil didn't just make you fight monsters, it made you survive them. When Resident Evil launched on the 22nd of March 1996, it was an instant hit. Critics praised its graphics, sound design, and terrifying atmosphere. The game sold over 4 million copies worldwide and defined a brand new genre, survival horror. The first Resident Evil was more than a game. It was a revolution in how fear could be experienced interactively. And even decades later, the echoes of that mansion, the slow creak of a door, the shuffle of undead feet, still haunt players around the world. Because survival horror began with Resident Evil. Resident Evil Director's Cut is one of the most important re-releases in survival horror history, serving as both a celebration and refinement of Capcom's 1996 classic. The original Resident Evil launched on the PlayStation and laid the foundation for the entire franchise with its fixed camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds, limited resources, and slow-burning tension. Its commercial success proved that survival horror had a strong future, and Capcom quickly began refining the formula. 2 years later, in 1997, Director's Cut was released as an enhanced version of the original game. The Director's Cut was designed to be the definitive version of Resident Evil for longtime fans and newcomers alike. While the core story remained the same, following either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine through the zombie-infested Spencer Mansion, it introduced several key improvements. One of the biggest changes was the addition of a ranged mode, a remixed difficulty that altered enemy placement, item locations, and puzzle solutions. This gave veteran players a fresh challenge, while preserving the original experience in original mode. Graphical upgrades were also included. Certain cutscenes were enhanced with improved visuals, and some of the camera angles were slightly adjusted for better presentation. The most controversial change, however, came in the form of the soundtrack. In one of the later releases of the Director's Cut, The original atmospheric score, composed by Masami Ueda, was replaced with a new soundtrack by Mamoru Samuragochi. The new music was widely criticized for being poorly mixed, off-tempo, and tonally inconsistent with the horror atmosphere, leading to it becoming infamous among fans. Despite the soundtrack controversy, the director's cut played an important role in keeping Resident Evil relevant as the series expanded rapidly with sequels. It allowed new players to experience the origins of the franchise while enjoying gameplay improvements that align more closely with later entries. The increased difficulty of Arranged mode also helped set the standard for remix modes that would later appear throughout the series. The legacy of Resident Evil Director's Cut became even more significant after Capcom released the full remake of the original game in 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube. By that point, the Director's Cut represented the final evolution of the classic fixed-camera version before full-scale remakes became the future of the franchise. It preserved the original mechanics while subtly modernizing the experience for the late 90s gaming audience. Today, Resident Evil Director's Cut is remembered as both a historical milestone and a collector's item. It represents the moment when Capcom began experimenting with refinement, remixing, and reimagining, concepts that would later define the series through remakes like Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4. Whether praised for its refined gameplay or criticized for its infamous music, the Director's Cut remains a crucial chapter in the long and evolving history of Resident Evil. In 1998, Capcom released one of the greatest sequels in gaming history. A game that expanded the world of survival horror, built on everything the first Resident Evil achieved, and pushed it to cinematic new heights. This is the story of Resident Evil 2, the sequel that defined a generation. After the success of Resident Evil in 1996, Capcom immediately began work on a sequel. The first version, known today as Resident Evil 1.5, was nearly complete. But director Hideki Kamiya and producer Shinji Mikami felt it wasn't good enough. They scrapped most of it and started over from scratch. This bold move almost derailed the project, but it led to something far greater. The new direction introduced a more cinematic tone, deeper storylines, and a world beyond the mansion. Resident Evil 2 takes place in Raccoon City, 2 months after the mansion incident. Players control rookie cop Leon S. Kennedy and college student Claire Redfield, who arrives searching for her brother Chris. The game opens with a bang, literally, as the two meet during a zombie outbreak and get separated. From there, each character has their own campaign, intersecting but offering unique perspectives and challenges. This zapping system was revolutionary for the time, allowing players to see how one story affected the other. Capcom refined everything that made the original great. The puzzles were smarter, the environments more detailed, and the tension unrelenting. Pre-rendered backgrounds brought Raccoon City to life, from the iconic police station to the dark sewers and secret Umbrella labs. Inventory management, limited ammo, and carefully placed save points kept the fear alive. Every zombie encounter mattered, and new enemies, like the relentless Licker and the towering Tyrant, pushed survival horror to new limits. When Resident Evil 2 launched on the 21st of January 1998, it was an instant phenomenon. Critics praised its storytelling, atmosphere, and cinematic presentation. It sold over 5 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling PlayStation games of all time. Resident Evil 2 didn't just follow up on a classic, it perfected the formula. It turned survival horror into something grander, more emotional, and unforgettable. And decades later, its influence still bleeds through modern gaming. Because in Raccoon City, the nightmare never truly ends. In 1999, Capcom returned with a sequel that took survival horror to a new level of terror. It was faster, louder, and more intense than anything the series had done before. This is the story of Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, the game that taught players to run. After Resident Evil 2 became a worldwide hit, Capcom wanted more. But they faced a problem. Resident Evil 3 wasn't supposed to exist. Originally, the team planned a spin-off game for the PlayStation, while Resident Evil 3 was being developed for the upcoming PlayStation 2. However, Sony wanted one more major Resident Evil title for the original PlayStation, so Capcom reworked the spin-off project into what became Resident Evil 3, Nemesis. Shinji Mikami produced it, while Kazuhiro Aoyama took over as director. The game begins just before and ends just after the events of Resident Evil 2. You play as Jill Valentine, one of the last surviving members of STARS, trying to escape a collapsing Raccoon City. The T-virus has spread everywhere. Zombies fill the streets, the city is burning, and Umbrella's influence lurks behind every shadow. But this time, there's something worse than the undead. A new kind of bioweapon. A relentless creature built for one purpose: to hunt down STARS members. His name? Nemesis. Unlike previous games, Resident Evil 3 focused on action and survival. Jill could dodge attacks, craft ammunition, and explore large city blocks filled with danger. The developers introduced live selection choices, where players had to make quick decisions that could alter the story or lead to instant death. And then there was Nemesis, the unstoppable monster who could appear anywhere, at any time. He jumped through windows, chased you through rooms, and uttered one terrifying word that defined an era: STARS. Players were no longer safe. The sense of control was gone, replaced with pure panic. Released on the 22nd of September 1999, Resident Evil 3, Nemesis was a critical and commercial success. It sold over 3.5 million copies and became the final Resident Evil title on the original PlayStation. The game's pacing, cinematic presentation, and Nemesis himself cemented it as a landmark in horror gaming. Even years later, the name Nemesis still sends chills down the spine of fans. Resident Evil 3, Nemesis wasn't just another sequel. It was a turning point, pushing survival horror toward the action-packed future that would define the series in the years to come. It taught us that sometimes, survival isn't about fighting, it's about running. Because no matter where you go, you can't hide from Nemesis. In the year 2000, Capcom decided to take the Resident Evil series in a completely new direction. Gone were the fixed camera angles, gone were the cinematic cutscenes, and in their place, a bold experiment that didn't quite land the way fans hoped. This is the story of Resident Evil Survivor, the forgotten first-person spin-off that changed how Capcom looked at horror. After the massive success of Resident Evil 3, Nemesis in 1999, Capcom wanted to expand the series beyond traditional consoles. They wanted something faster, something that could appeal to arcade fans and gun controller players. So, in collaboration with TOS, Capcom developed Resident Evil Survivor, also known as Biohazard, Gun Survivor in Japan. It was released for the PlayStation and arcade systems in early 2000. The game was meant to be played with a light gun, allowing players to literally aim and shoot at zombies from a first-person perspective. It was the first time in Resident Evil history that players saw Raccoon City not from behind the character, but through their eyes. The story begins after a mysterious helicopter crash on an isolated island known as Sheena Island. You play as an amnesiac man who awakens with no memory of who he is, only to discover the island overrun by the undead. As the story unfolds, the man realizes he is Ark Thompson, an undercover agent investigating Umbrella's experiments. But there's a twist. Umbrella's clone technology has been used to create an imposter of Ark, and the confusion drives much of the game's tension. Players uncover journals, explore laboratories, and fight their way through familiar bioengineered horrors, from zombies to tyrants. While the setup had promise, the execution left players frustrated. Resident Evil Survivor was ambitious, but flawed. On paper, it combined first-person shooting with survival horror puzzles. In practice, the graphics were muddy, the controls clunky, and the pacing uneven. The biggest disappointment for Western players came when Capcom removed light gun support from the North American release, citing concerns about gun violence. This left players using only a controller, and it made aiming painfully awkward. Critics called the game confusing, dull, and repetitive. But hidden beneath its flaws was a fascinating experiment, one that hinted at Resident Evil's future evolution into more action-focused gameplay. Despite poor reviews, Resident Evil Survivor did well enough in Japan to spawn several sequels, including Survivor 2, Code Veronica, and Dead Aim. It became the foundation for the Gun Survivor sub-series, a line of rail shooters that continued on PlayStation 2 and arcade machines. Today, Resident Evil Survivor is remembered less for its success and more for its experimentation. It was an early attempt to blend horror and action, a design philosophy that Capcom would refine years later in Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil Survivor might not have been a critical hit, but it was a bold step into new territory. The first-person horror experiment that dared to change the formula. It stumbled so later titles could run. And for that reason, it remains an essential, if overlooked, part of Resident Evil history. Because even the weakest survivors still have a story worth telling. In the year 2000, Resident Evil Code Veronica marked a turning point for Capcom's legendary horror series. While many thought Resident Evil 3, Nemesis was the end of the PlayStation trilogy, Code Veronica was the true continuation of the story, a bold leap forward in graphics, storytelling, and emotional depth. This is the history of Resident Evil, Code Veronica, the game that dared to evolve the nightmare. After the success of Resident Evil 2 and Nemesis, Capcom wanted to push beyond the limitations of pre-rendered backgrounds. They envisioned a fully 3D environment, something that allowed dynamic camera angles, real-time lighting, and a cinematic feel never before seen in the franchise. Originally planned for the PlayStation, Code Veronica became a Sega Dreamcast exclusive, taking advantage of its advanced hardware. It was developed by Capcom Production Studio 4 under the direction of Shinji Mikami and Hiroki Kato. This marked the first time a mainline Resident Evil game skipped Sony's console, a risky but bold decision. The story picks up 3 months after Resident Evil 2. Claire Redfield, still searching for her brother Chris, infiltrates an Umbrella facility in Paris, but is captured and sent to Rockford Island, a remote prison run by Umbrella. When a mysterious attack devastates the island, Claire must fight to survive the chaos of another viral outbreak. Throughout the game, she's aided by a fellow prisoner, Steve Burnside, a hot-headed teenager with a tragic past. As the story unfolds, Claire faces the sadistic twins, Alfred and Alexia Ashford, heirs to one of Umbrella's founding families. The Ashfords' twisted experiments and obsession with perfection drive much of the game's gothic horror tone. Later, Chris Redfield returns for the second half of the game, reuniting with his sister in a desperate race against time and mutation. Code Veronica was revolutionary for its time. It used fully 3D environments instead of static backgrounds, allowing the camera to follow players dynamically. This innovation made the world feel more alive. Eerie hallways, flickering lights, and haunting reflections. Players could now aim in real time, dual-wield weapons, and experience cinematic cutscenes rendered in-engine. The game was also praised for its deep narrative, blending family tragedy, betrayal, and Umbrella's ever-growing corruption. Upon release, critics and fans praised Code Veronica for its storytelling and atmosphere. It was considered the most emotional Resident Evil to date, highlighting Claire's resilience and Chris's determination. While some criticized its difficulty and dated controls, the game's presentation was ahead of its time. Later re-released as Code Veronica X for PlayStation 2, it added new cutscenes and improved visuals, cementing its legacy. Today, it's remembered as one of the last classic-style Resident Evil games before the franchise's shift toward action with Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil Code Veronica wasn't just another sequel, it was a bridge between eras. It expanded the lore, deepened the characters, and laid the groundwork for the evolution of survival horror. It reminded players that even in a world consumed by darkness, family bonds and courage could still light the way. And that's why Code Veronica remains one of the most haunting and heartfelt chapters in Resident Evil history. In 2001, Capcom released one of the strangest and most overlooked entries in the Resident Evil franchise. It wasn't on PlayStation, Dreamcast, or even PC. It was on the Game Boy Color, a handheld console not known for horror. This is the story of Resident Evil Gaiden, the portable experiment that almost never saw the light of day. At the turn of the millennium, Capcom wanted to expand Resident Evil beyond home consoles. They saw the Game Boy Color as a chance to reach new audiences, to bring survival horror into your pocket. But there was a huge problem. The hardware was incredibly limited. No 3D environments, no voice acting, no atmospheric lighting or detailed zombies. So, the task of adapting Resident Evil for handhelds went to a British studio called M4 Limited. They were known for their work on 2D adventure titles, not horror. Still, they aimed to create a game that felt like Resident Evil despite the restrictions. The result was Resident Evil Gaiden, a blend of exploration, top-down movement, and first-person combat. The game's story follows Barry Burton, the fan-favorite character from the original Resident Evil. Barry is investigating a luxury cruise ship called the Starlight after reports of a bioweapon outbreak on board. He's searching for Leon S. Kennedy, who's gone missing during a previous mission. As Barry explores the ship, he encounters survivors and the infected passengers. The setting, though limited by the hardware, carries a haunting isolation. Metal corridors, empty rooms, and the sound of unseen danger just off-screen. Eventually, Barry finds Leon, but something feels off. Leon's behavior is strange, his tone cold. As the story unfolds, players discover a shocking twist. The Leon Barry finds isn't the real Leon at all. He's a BOW mimic, a bioorganic weapon capable of imitating human form. It's one of the most unexpected story turns in the series. Resident Evil Gaiden uses a mix of perspectives. Players explore the ship from a top-down view, solving puzzles and managing resources. When combat begins, the view shifts to first person, where timing and precision determine success. It's a unique mechanic, though often criticized for being clunky and slow. Despite its rough edges, the game captures that classic Resident Evil tension, limited ammo, creeping dread, and the fear of what's behind the next door. Released in December 2001, Resident Evil Gaiden received mixed reviews. Critics praised its ambition but noted the technical struggles of bringing console horror to a handheld device. Still, it found a small cult following among fans who admired its boldness. It also introduced one of the franchise's most underrated protagonists. Barry Burton finally got his own game. Today, Resident Evil Gaiden is remembered as a strange, brave experiment. It's not canon, but it holds a special place in series history as the game that dared to bring zombies to the Game Boy Color. In the end, Resident Evil Gaiden stands as proof that innovation often comes from unlikely places. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even pretty. But it showed that Resident Evil could survive outside the mansion walls, even inside a tiny 8-bit cartridge. Sometimes, horror finds a way, no matter the platform. In 2001, Capcom released a follow-up to one of the most unusual Resident Evil spin-offs ever made. It was called Resident Evil Survivor 2, Code Veronica, and it combined the world of Code Veronica with the light gun mechanics of Survivor. It was fast, frantic, and completely different from the slow, tense survival horror fans were used to. This is the history of Resident Evil Survivor 2, Code Veronica, the forgotten sequel that tried to turn fear into arcade action. After the release of Resident Evil Survivor in 2000, Capcom wanted to improve on the formula. The first game had been criticized for poor controls and awkward pacing, but it showed potential as a light gun experience. So, Capcom teamed up with TOS, a Japanese developer known for their work on ports and spin-offs. Their goal was to create a faster, more polished version that captured the intensity of Code Veronica's story, but with a pure arcade style. The result was Resident Evil Survivor 2, Code Veronica, built for arcades first, using Namco's System 246 hardware. It was later ported to the PlayStation 2, giving home players a chance to step back into the nightmare. The game's story isn't a direct continuation of Code Veronica. Instead, It plays like a virtual simulation, or nightmare version of the events. Players take control of Claire Redfield and Steve Burnside, trapped once again in the twisted world of Rockford Island. Their goal is to escape within a strict time limit, battling hordes of enemies along the way. The narrative is thin, but the atmosphere is thick with tension, dark corridors, eerie lighting, and enemies lurking at every turn. It feels more like a dream sequence than a true sequel, blurring the line between reality and memory. Unlike traditional Resident Evil titles, Survivor 2 focuses entirely on first-person shooting. Players use a light gun or controller to aim and fire at enemies while navigating through familiar environments from Code Veronica. Ammo and time management are key. Every missed shot costs valuable seconds. The game also features a panic mode, where if players take too much damage, the screen shakes and the character's breathing quickens, heightening the sense of urgency. New to this entry was a two-player co-op mode in the arcade version, letting friends face the nightmare together. When Resident Evil Survivor 2, Code Veronica launched, reviews were mixed. Fans enjoyed revisiting the Rockfort setting, but many criticized the repetitive gameplay and lack of a strong story. In 2002, survival horror was reborn. The mansion that terrified a generation returned, darker, deadlier, and more beautiful than ever before. This is the story of Resident Evil, a game that didn't just honor the past, it reinvented it. By the early 2000s, Resident Evil had become a global success. But series creator Shinji Mikami believed the original 1996 version hadn't fully captured his vision. Technology had advanced. The GameCube offered power beyond anything the PlayStation could have imagined. So, Mikami decided to remake his own masterpiece from the ground up. Every environment, texture, and sound was rebuilt. Every camera angle reimagined. What emerged was not a simple update, but a complete transformation. The story begins once again on the outskirts of Raccoon City, in the shadow of the Arklay Mountains. STAR's Alpha Team is sent to investigate the disappearance of Bravo Team. Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Albert Wesker. They take refuge inside the Spencer Mansion, unaware of the horrors waiting within. The premise was the same, but this time, the mansion lived and breathed. Its hallways dripped with atmosphere, its shadows felt alive, and its secrets ran even deeper. The 2002 remake introduced players to Lisa Trevor, a tragic new character and one of the series' most haunting figures. A young girl, twisted by Umbrella's experiments, she wandered the mansion grounds, immortal in agony. Lisa's presence added a layer of humanity and terror that elevated the story beyond simple survival. And the zombies? They had evolved too. For the first time, players encountered Crimson Heads, undead corpses that could rise again, faster and stronger, unless burned or decapitated. This new mechanic forced players to think carefully before every encounter. Killing wasn't always the safest option anymore. When Resident Evil launched on the GameCube in March 2002, critics were stunned. The pre-rendered backgrounds looked like paintings brought to life. The lighting, sound design, and creature animation were revolutionary. Many called it one of the most atmospheric games ever created. Even today, it remains one of the best-looking titles of its generation. The 2002 remake didn't just redefine a classic, it redefined survival horror itself. It proved that fear could be timeless, that atmosphere could outlast technology, and that sometimes returning to the beginning is the most terrifying path forward. Resident Evil wasn't just a game, it was a resurrection. And it set the standard for every remake that followed. Before Raccoon City, before the mansion, there was a train racing through the Arklay Mountains, and aboard it, the true origin of evil. In 2002, Resident Evil 0 took players back to where the nightmare began. A prequel to the original Resident Evil, this game explored the very first outbreak, the creation of the T-Virus, and the fall of the Stars Bravo team. This is the history of Resident Evil Zero, the story that started it all. Development of Resident Evil Zero began in 1998, originally for the Nintendo 64. Capcom's idea was to use the console's cartridge-based quick data access to allow players to swap between two characters instantly. But as development progressed, the N64's memory limitations became a serious problem. When Capcom shifted focus to the Nintendo GameCube, the project was revived and enhanced. The result was one of the most visually impressive horror games of its time, built on the same engine as the Resident Evil Remake. The game begins on July 23, 1998. The Stars Bravo team is sent to investigate a series of strange murders in the Arklay Mountains. Among them is Rebecca Chambers, a young medic who soon finds herself stranded aboard a mysterious train, the Ecliptic Express. The passengers are dead. The train is crawling with leeches. And she's not alone. Rebecca meets Billy Cohen, a former Marine convicted of murder. Forced to work together, they uncover the horrifying truth. A rogue Umbrella scientist named Dr. James Marcus created the T-Virus using parasitic leeches, only to be betrayed by his own corporation. Now, his revenge has begun. Resident Evil Zero introduced the partner zapping system, letting players switch between Rebecca and Billy at any time. Each character had unique strengths. Rebecca could mix herbs and handle chemicals, while Billy had more combat power. Instead of using storage boxes, players dropped items on the floor and returned to retrieve them later, a first for the series. This mechanic forced players to plan carefully and manage resources like never before. When it released in 2002, Resident Evil Zero received praise for its stunning graphics, atmosphere, and deep lore connections to the original game. However, some critics noted that its traditional tank, controls, and item management felt outdated. Despite this, the game became a cult favorite among fans, especially those fascinated by the Umbrella backstory. Its success led to multiple re-releases on Wii, PS3, PS4, Xbox, and PC, ensuring its place as a key chapter in Resident Evil's timeline. Resident Evil Zero didn't just expand the franchise, it completed the circle. It gave us Rebecca's origin, Umbrella's sins, and the spark that ignited the horror of Raccoon City. It's the beginning of the end, a haunting reminder that evil always has a source. And it all started on that doomed train. In 2003, Resident Evil set sail on a new kind of horror. Not in a mansion, not in Raccoon City, but on a massive cruise ship adrift in the dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean. This is the story of Resident Evil, Dead Aim, the hybrid experiment that dared to mix survival horror with first-person shooting and almost pulled it off. By the early 2000s, Resident Evil had become one of Capcom's biggest franchises. But fans were divided. Some loved the slow, methodical tension of the classics. Others wanted faster, more action-driven gameplay. Capcom needed a middle ground. That's where Dead Aim came in. Developed by Cavia and released for the PlayStation 2, in 2003, the game aimed to blend traditional survival horror exploration with light gun-style shooting mechanics. It was part of the Gun Survivor sub-series, but it stood apart for one reason: quality. The year is 2002. A luxury ocean liner called the Spencer Rain is hijacked by terrorists, led by Morphin D. Ashford, a deranged descendant of the infamous Ashford family. Their plan? Release the T-Virus on the high seas. Players step into the role of Bruce McGivern, an American government agent sent to stop the attack. But he's not alone. He's joined by Fong Ling, a Chinese intelligence agent with her own agenda. Together, they must navigate the decaying ship, uncover Umbrella's involvement, and survive waves of infected passengers and bioweapons. Dead Aim introduced a unique control scheme. Players explored the ship from a third-person perspective, but when aiming, the camera switched to first-person view, allowing for more precise shooting. This mechanic balanced horror and action better than previous Gun Survivor entries. Ammo was limited. Resources were scarce. And atmosphere was everything. Dark corridors, dripping pipes, and eerie silence gave the Spencer Rain a claustrophobic sense of dread, like being trapped in a steel coffin at sea. When Resident Evil Dead Aim launched in June 2003, it didn't make massive waves, but it did surprise critics. Many praised its blend of gameplay styles and stronger storytelling compared to its predecessors. Others saw it as a hidden gem, a bridge between classic Resident Evil and the faster, more cinematic games that would follow. While not a mainline entry, Dead Aim earned a loyal cult following for its creativity and tone. Resident Evil Dead Aim remains one of the series' most overlooked experiments. It wasn't perfect, but it was ambitious. It dared to explore new waters, both literally and creatively. And in doing so, it became a quiet turning point for the franchise. Long before Resident Evil 4 redefined action horror, Dead Aim tested the waters. And in those dark, rolling waves, you can still feel the echoes of survival horror's evolution. In 2003, Capcom did something Resident Evil fans had only dreamed about. They brought survival horror online. Outbreak was an ambitious attempt to make players experience the terror of Raccoon City together, not just as survivors, but as ordinary people fighting for their lives. It wasn't perfect, but it was groundbreaking. And it paved the way for multiplayer horror as we know it today. By the early 2000s, Resident Evil had already changed gaming forever. But Capcom wanted to evolve. The PlayStation 2 had just introduced online capabilities, and developers were eager to experiment. So, producer Tsuyoshi Tanaka and director Koichi Hiroyuki set out to create something new. A Resident Evil game where teamwork was essential for survival. Not just one hero with a gun, but 8 playable survivors, each with unique abilities, trying to escape the nightmare of Raccoon City. This became Resident Evil Outbreak. The game takes place during the early stages of the Raccoon City outbreak, parallel to Resident Evil 2 and 3. Instead of police officers or special agents, players step into the shoes of everyday citizens. There's Kevin, the cop with sharp shooting skills. Mark, a security guard haunted by his past. Yoko, a quiet student with ties to Umbrella. And others, each with their own strengths and backstories. Together, they navigate multiple scenarios, from escaping a zombie-infested bar to surviving a deadly hospital, and even confronting bioweapons in the depths of the city. What made Outbreak truly revolutionary was its online cooperative gameplay. Players could connect through the PlayStation 2 network adapter and face the horror together. However, there was a catch. Voice chat wasn't supported. Instead, players used preset phrases like "come on" or "help" to communicate under pressure. This limitation surprisingly enhanced the tension. Every encounter felt desperate, every second mattered, and teamwork meant survival. It was chaotic, stressful, and unforgettable. Resident Evil Outbreak released in Japan in 2003 and in North America in 2004. While praised for its concept and atmosphere, it struggled with long loading times and limited online infrastructure. Still, dedicated fans loved it, and even more so after the release of Outbreak File Number 2 in 2004, which expanded the story and scenarios. Although the online servers were shut down years later, fan communities eventually revived them, keeping the game alive to this day. Outbreak may not have reached the mainstream success Capcom hoped for, but it was far ahead of its time. It planted the seed for future multiplayer horror titles, from Resident Evil, Resistance, to Dead by Daylight. It showed that fear is stronger when shared, and that sometimes the scariest part of survival is realizing you can't do it alone. In 2004, just 1 year after the original Resident Evil Outbreak, Capcom returned with a sequel that aimed to fix what the first game couldn't. It was faster, smoother, scarier, and far more ambitious. This was Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2, the sequel that perfected the online survival horror experiment and became a cult legend among fans. The first Outbreak had a bold idea: take the fear of Resident Evil online. But technical limits of the PlayStation 2 held it back. Slow load times, no voice chat, and network instability frustrated many players. Capcom listened. With file number 2, they improved everything: faster scenario transitions, smoother controls, and better AI companions for those who played offline. But most importantly, the game introduced brand new scenarios, new creatures, and a deeper connection to the Raccoon City storyline. This sequel wasn't just an expansion, it was a full experience. Players once again stepped into the roles of 8 survivors from the first game, but this time they faced even deadlier situations. In Wild Things, players battled through the Raccoon City Zoo, where mutated lions and giant elephants replaced the familiar zombie hordes. Flashback took players to a mist-covered forest and an abandoned hospital, blending psychological horror with the virus outbreak. And Desperate Times brought fans straight into the Raccoon City Police Department, the same iconic building from Resident Evil 2, now under siege and collapsing into chaos. Each scenario pushed the series deeper into cinematic storytelling and survival tension. Like its predecessor, Outbreak File Number 2 focused on teamwork. Players had to communicate using the same limited preset phrases: go, over here, wait, which added to the urgency and panic of every encounter. Even without voice chat, cooperation was key. And because of that, the game built one of the strongest cult communities in Resident Evil history. Fans didn't just play together, they survived together. When File Number 2 released, critics praised its atmosphere, scenario design, and improvements over the original. But once again, its online nature limited its reach. When Capcom eventually shut down the servers in the late 2000s, many thought it was the end. But the Outbreak community refused to let go. Fans created private servers, translated the Japanese versions, and kept the online experience alive decades later. Today, Outbreak File Number 2 is remembered as a masterpiece lost to time, a game that dared to dream beyond the limits of its era. It may not have sold millions, but it built a legacy. Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2 proved that teamwork could make horror more powerful, that surviving together is more terrifying than surviving alone. And even though the world of Raccoon City fell, its survivors, and the players who kept fighting, ensured the spirit of Outbreak never truly died. In 2005, Resident Evil didn't just evolve, it reinvented itself. After years of fixed camera angles and slow survival horror pacing, Capcom took a bold leap into the unknown. The result was Resident Evil 4, a game that didn't just redefine the franchise, it redefined modern gaming itself. By the early 2000s, Resident Evil was showing its age. Fans still loved the tension, but the series needed something new, something bolder. That's when Shinji Mikami, the creator of Resident Evil, decided to rebuild the series from the ground up. The team scrapped traditional zombies, replaced them with terrifying, intelligent villagers known as Los Ganados, and shifted the camera directly behind the player's shoulder. That single design choice, the over-the-shoulder perspective, would forever change action and horror games alike. Resident Evil 4 follows Leon S. Kennedy, the rookie cop from Resident Evil 2, now a government agent on a mission to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley Graham. His journey takes him deep into a remote Spanish village, a place consumed by a mysterious cult and infected by a mind-controlling parasite known as Las Plagas. The villagers weren't mindless zombies. They could dodge attacks, coordinate assaults, and even wield weapons. For the first time, players weren't just surviving, they were fighting back with precision. Every encounter felt personal. Every bullet mattered. When it launched, Resident Evil 4 was unlike anything before it. Its pacing was relentless, blending cinematic tension with explosive action. From the infamous village siege, to the eerie castle corridors, to the grotesque island facility, every section felt handcrafted to push the player's nerves to their limit. The game introduced context-sensitive controls, dynamic aiming, and a sense of control never before seen in the series. And yet, it never lost its horror roots. It was brutal. It was beautiful. It was unforgettable. Critics called it a masterpiece. Players called it revolutionary, and game developers around the world took notes. The over-the-shoulder camera became the standard for third-person shooters, inspiring titles like Gears of War, Dead Space, and The Last of Us. Resident Evil 4 went on to sell millions of copies and has been remade, re-released, and revered across nearly every console since. Even decades later, it stands tall as one of the greatest games ever made. In the end, Resident Evil 4 was more than just a sequel. It was a revolution, a perfect storm of innovation, tension, and style that reignited a series and reshaped gaming history forever. And for fans of survival horror, it proved one thing. Sometimes, the scariest step is the one that moves everything forward. In 2006, Resident Evil made an unexpected move. The series that defined survival horror on consoles was now stepping into handheld territory. This was Resident Evil: Deadly Silence, a Nintendo DS remake of the 1996 classic, rebuilt to fit in the palm of your hand. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was proof that even 10 years later, the horrors of the Spencer Mansion still had life left in them. Deadly Silence arrived to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Resident Evil. Capcom took the original PlayStation game and carefully adapted it for the Nintendo DS, a system built for touch controls, dual screens, and portable gameplay. Players once again joined Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, members of the STARS team, as they investigated strange murders in the Arklay Mountains. Their search led them to the infamous mansion, where dark corridors, puzzles, and biological nightmares awaited. Even on the small screen, the tension was unmistakable. Every creak, every echo, every zombie groan reminded players of how the series began. Capcom gave players two distinct ways to play. Classic mode offered the original PlayStation experience: fixed camera angles, tank controls, and authentic cutscenes. But Rebirth mode was where Deadly Silence truly shined. It redesigned puzzles to use the DS touchscreen, microphone, and dual screens in clever ways. Players slashed zombies by swiping the stylus, solved puzzles by blowing dust off mirrors, and used quick first-person knife battles to survive ambushes. It was both a tribute and a reinvention. A familiar nightmare with brand new tricks. The DS wasn't known for mature or frightening games, which made Deadly Silence stand out even more. It showed that true survival horror could thrive even on a handheld system. While the graphics were scaled down, the atmosphere remained hauntingly intact. Fans praised the faithful recreation, the new features, and the portability of one of gaming's most iconic horror experiences. For many, it was their first taste of Resident Evil, one they could carry anywhere. Resident Evil: Deadly Silence didn't break sales records, but it earned respect. It kept the series alive between major releases and reminded fans that Resident Evil's roots still mattered. In an era of action-heavy sequels, it was a love letter to where the fear began. Even today, it's remembered fondly as the perfect pocket-sized horror story, proof that terror doesn't need high-end graphics to leave a lasting impression. It was small, eerie, and unforgettable. A 10-year anniversary gift that reminded the world, no matter the platform, the mansion still calls, and inside those walls, survival is never guaranteed. In 2007, Capcom gave fans a new way to relive the chaos. Not through exploration, not through puzzles, but through fire, bullets, and light gun precision. This was Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles, a bold reimagining of the franchise's most iconic events, retold through the eyes of those who lived them. And for the first time, players could destroy Umbrella's legacy one monster at a time. Developed for the Nintendo Wii, The Umbrella Chronicles turned Resident Evil into an on-rails shooter, combining fast-paced action with deep storytelling. The game followed the downfall of the Umbrella Corporation, the shadowy company responsible for the viral outbreaks that turned cities into graveyards. But instead of a single protagonist, it wove together multiple perspectives. Players took control of Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Rebecca Chambers, and Billy Cohen, among others. Each mission revisited familiar locations, from the Spencer Mansion to Raccoon City, but from a brand new cinematic angle. The game condensed key events from Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 1, and Resident Evil 3 into intense, action-packed chapters. Every scene unfolded like a guided horror movie, with enemies bursting through windows, bosses filling the screen, and quick reflexes deciding who survived. The Wii Remote became your weapon, letting players aim, reload, and fire with visceral accuracy. But beneath the chaos, the story was crucial. Every level revealed new documents and details about Umbrella's inner workings, linking together the fragmented history of the series. It wasn't just a shooter, it was a timeline, a confession from the corporation that started it all. Then came the twist, a completely original campaign. Players followed Albert Wesker, the former STARS captain turned Umbrella defector. His story filled in missing gaps, showing how he survived, manipulated events, and began his rise as the series' ultimate villain. This fresh perspective gave the Umbrella Chronicles weight beyond nostalgia. It was the bridge between Resident Evil's past and its darker, more global future. Upon release, the Umbrella Chronicles was praised for its graphics, atmosphere, and lore. The environmental destruction, interactive cinematics, and voice acting brought Resident Evil's most haunting moments to life again, this time through the lens of action. It became one of the Wii's best-selling horror titles, proving that even in a simplified format, Resident Evil's storytelling power remained unmatched. Its success led directly to a sequel, The Darkside Chronicles, expanding even further into untold corners of the franchise. The Umbrella Chronicles wasn't just a retelling, it was a reckoning. A fast-paced descent through the ashes of Umbrella's empire, and a chilling reminder that in the world of Resident Evil, the story is never truly over. By 2009, the world of Resident Evil had changed forever. Umbrella had fallen. The age of corporate bioterror was over, but the virus had already spread beyond containment. And for Resident Evil 5, Capcom took the fight into the sun. This time, the horror wasn't hiding in the shadows. It was out in the open. Set in the fictional region of Kijuju, Africa, Resident Evil 5 followed Chris Redfield, a veteran of countless biohazard outbreaks now working for the BSAA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance. His mission seemed simple: stop the spread of a new virus. But the deeper he went, the more familiar the nightmare became. By his side was Sheva Alomar, his BSAA partner, a local agent who knew the terrain, the culture, and the growing danger beneath it. Together, they would uncover something horrifying, a new evolution of bioweapon that blurred the line between infection and control. When Resident Evil 4 reinvented the series, Capcom doubled down. Resident Evil 5 embraced high-intensity action, co-op gameplay, and cinematic spectacle. For the first time, players could fight the outbreak with a partner in split-screen or online play. The claustrophobic corridors were replaced by open battlefields, scorching deserts, and ancient ruins. It wasn't about isolation anymore. It was about survival together. But at its core, Resident Evil 5 was a confrontation with the past. Chris's personal mission wasn't just to stop the virus. It was to find Jill Valentine, his missing partner, long presumed dead. The game slowly revealed that Albert Wesker, the longtime antagonist of the series, had returned, stronger, faster, and closer to godhood than ever before. What began as a rescue mission became a battle for humanity's future. Wesker's ambition to create a world of evolutionary perfection would lead to one of the most explosive finales in gaming history. Upon release, Resident Evil 5 became one of Capcom's best-selling titles of all time. Critics praised its visuals, cinematic scope, and cooperative gameplay. But it also marked a turning point. a shift from survival horror to action thriller. Some fans missed the fear, others embraced the evolution. Either way, Resident Evil 5 proved that the series could survive, even under the brightest light. From its intense firefights to its unforgettable final showdown, Resident Evil 5 was more than a sequel. It was the end of an era, the final confrontation between old heroes and the last shadow of Umbrella's legacy. And when the dust settled, one truth remained. You can kill the monsters, but you can never kill the virus. By 2009, the nightmares of Raccoon City had already been told, but there were still shadows left unexplored, stories buried deep beneath the chaos. Capcom wasn't done yet. With Resident Evil: The Darkside Chronicles, players would return to those forgotten corners of the franchise through fear, memory, and guilt. And this time, the darkness was personal. Developed for the Nintendo Wii, The Darkside Chronicles built on the foundation of the Umbrella Chronicles, refining its on-rails shooter design with cinematic ambition. The developers at Cavia focused on one goal: immersion. They gave the camera a living, breathing quality. It swayed, stumbled, and shook as if the player themselves were trapped in the nightmare. The effect was visceral. Every encounter felt unstable, unpredictable, and real. This time, the story followed Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield picking up after the collapse of Raccoon City. The game's main narrative, Operation Javier, introduced a brand new storyline set deep in the jungles of South America. Leon, now a U.S. government agent, is sent on a covert mission alongside his partner Jack Krauser. Their target? A drug lord connected to Umbrella's bioweapons research. But what they find instead is a horror that hits far too close to home. In between jungle missions, the game dives back into flashbacks, revisiting classic chapters from Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil Code Veronica. Players relive Leon and Claire's desperate escape from Raccoon City, then shift to Claire and Steve Burnside's struggle through Rockford Island. Each retelling was carefully reconstructed with enhanced visuals, voice acting, and deeper emotional resonance. This was no longer just nostalgia, it was reflection. A chance to re-experience the trauma through modern eyes. Where the Umbrella Chronicles focused on action, the Darkside Chronicles focused on emotion, it humanized its characters. Krauser's slow descent into madness, Leon's guilt and hesitation, Claire's determination to hold on to hope. The shaky, documentary-style camera wasn't just a gimmick, it mirrored the fear and uncertainty inside each of them. Every battle was both physical and psychological. When the Darkside Chronicles released in 2009, it was praised for its cinematic quality, stunning graphics, and storytelling depth. The environments, from the rain-soaked jungles to the burning streets of Raccoon City, were among the most detailed ever seen on the Wii. And while some fans missed traditional exploration, many agreed it was one of the most atmospheric entries in the series. A farewell to the old Resident Evil era, and a bridge toward the future of the franchise. The Darkside Chronicles wasn't just a retelling of horror. It was a confession of fear, regret, and memory. A reminder that no matter how far the survivors run, the past always finds them. And sometimes, the real terror lives inside the stories we try to forget. By 2011, Resident Evil had conquered consoles, terrified millions, and redefined survival horror. But this time, Capcom had a new challenge, bringing that same high-intensity fear to a handheld device. Enter Resident Evil, the Mercenaries 3D, a portable experiment that turned the series' most addictive bonus mode into a full, standalone experience. Fast, frantic, and built for mastery. This was Resident Evil like you'd never played it before. The Mercenaries mode had first appeared as a minigame in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and later perfected in Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5. Players loved it. A timed, score-based gauntlet where survival wasn't just about living, but about style. Chaining kills, managing ammo, and using every second wisely became an obsession for fans. So, when the Nintendo 3DS was announced, Capcom saw an opportunity. Why not build an entire game around that pure, arcade-style adrenaline rush? Resident Evil, the Mercenaries 3D was released in June 2011, designed from the ground up for Nintendo's new handheld. It featured high-quality visuals, 3D effects, and familiar locations pulled straight from Resident Evil 4 and 5. Players could choose from 8 iconic characters, including Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Hunk, and even fan favorite Albert Wesker. Each came with their own weapons, skills, and signature animations. The goal? Defeat as many enemies as possible before time ran out, all while dodging chainsaw maniacs, rocket troopers, and the ever-persistent Majini hordes. It was fast, tense, and incredibly replayable. For a handheld game, the Mercenaries 3D was ambitious. It introduced online co-op play, allowing 2 players to team up and tackle missions together. It also offered skill customization, letting players tweak abilities and create different loadouts. But the game wasn't without controversy. Capcom made headlines when players discovered that save data couldn't be deleted, meaning progress was permanent. Critics worried it would hurt used game sales, and fans voiced their frustration. Capcom eventually clarified that it wasn't meant to punish players, but the damage was done. Despite the backlash, the Mercenaries 3D achieved its goal. It proved that Resident Evil's intense combat and pressure-filled gameplay could work on a portable console. It wasn't a full, story-driven adventure, but it didn't need to be. It was pure, distilled action. A love letter to the fans who lived for precision headshots, time extensions, and S-rank scores. And while it didn't redefine the series, it kept the franchise alive on the go, paving the way for future handheld experiments like Resident Evil Revelations. Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D may not have been the scariest game in the series, but it captured the heart-pounding tension that made Resident Evil unforgettable. Short, sharp, and endlessly replayable, it was a test of reflexes, strategy, and survival. Because in The Mercenaries, the clock never stops ticking, and every second counts. By 2012, Resident Evil was at a crossroads. Fans loved the explosive action of Resident Evil 5, but many longed for the creeping dread and claustrophobic tension that defined the series' origins. Capcom listened and decided it was time to bring horror back to the forefront. The result was Resident Evil Revelations, a chilling voyage into the unknown that redefined handheld gaming and restored the fear that started it all. Released first for the Nintendo 3DS, Revelations was more than just a side story. It was a fully cinematic experience designed to bridge the gap between Resident Evil 4 and 5. For the first time, players were thrust into a survival horror epic built for a handheld, complete with stunning visuals, detailed environments, and full voice acting. Capcom pushed the 3DS hardware to its limits, creating one of the most impressive portable games of its era. The story follows Jill Valentine, one of the original Resident Evil heroes, as she investigates the disappearance of her former partner, Chris Redfield. Her search leads to the Queen Zenobia, a massive, abandoned cruise ship drifting silently in the Mediterranean. Inside, she discovers more than just answers. She finds nightmares reborn. Twisted aquatic bioweapons stalk the halls, remnants of a new viral threat known as the T-Abyss virus. Every corridor creaks with dread. Every door hides danger. It's classic Resident Evil tension, modernized for a new generation. Revelations brought back the survival elements fans missed: limited ammo, tight spaces, and constant vulnerability. The over-the-shoulder camera from Resident Evil 4 returned, but this time with the ability to move and shoot simultaneously, a first for the series. Players could scan their environments using a Genesis scanner, searching for hidden items and secrets. Meanwhile, the ship's layout created a looping, interconnected world, much like the iconic Spencer Mansion. And for those craving more action, Raid Mode added a fast-paced, cooperative experience, letting players tackle missions together for rewards and upgrades. After its 3DS success, Revelations was remastered for HD consoles in 2013, bringing the once handheld exclusive horror to PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. The improved visuals, lighting, and controls introduced the game to an even wider audience. Critics praised its return to atmospheric horror, its pacing, and Jill's compelling narrative. It proved that Resident Evil could evolve, embracing both fear and modern gameplay. And it laid the groundwork for its equally ambitious sequel, Resident Evil Revelations 2. Resident Evil Revelations wasn't just another spin-off. It was a reminder of what made the series great in the first place: mystery, tension, and survival against impossible odds. Trapped aboard a ghostly ship in the middle of the ocean, Jill Valentine reminded us all why she's one of gaming's most enduring icons. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't in the dark, they're right beneath the surface. In 2012, Capcom decided to take Resident Evil in a bold new direction. A darker, grittier, and more combat-focused spin on the Raccoon City outbreak. This was Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, a game that asked one simple question: what if you weren't the hero trying to survive, but the soldier sent to erase the evidence? Unlike previous entries in the series, Operation Raccoon City wasn't about horror or survival. It was a team-based third-person shooter, set during the events of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. Players joined the Umbrella Security Service, an elite cleanup squad tasked with destroying the truth about the Raccoon City incident. You weren't saving civilians, you were silencing them. This brutal, morally gray twist was unlike anything the series had done before. Capcom partnered with Slant 6 Games, a Canadian studio known for its SOCOM series experience. The goal was to merge tactical squad mechanics with the infected chaos of Resident Evil. Players could choose from 6 operatives, each with unique abilities, from medics and snipers to stealth specialists. The game featured both campaign missions and multiplayer modes, letting players fight as Umbrella agents or US Spec Ops soldiers. Iconic creatures like Lickers, Hunters, and Tyrants roamed the battlefield, unpredictable threats that attacked everyone. It was gritty, intense, and filled with nostalgia for longtime fans. Set in 1998, Operation Raccoon City revisited the outbreak from a new perspective. Your mission: eliminate survivors, collect viral samples, and wipe out any evidence linking Umbrella to the disaster. Along the way, you encounter familiar faces: Leon S. Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and Hunk. But this time, you're not on their side. In one controversial mission, players are even ordered to kill Leon, a shocking what-if scenario that stirred debate among fans. It wasn't canon, but it gave players a taste of an alternate Resident Evil universe. When Operation Raccoon City launched, expectations were sky high, but the response was mixed. Fans loved the concept and setting, but criticized the gameplay for being clunky and repetitive. The horror was replaced with heavy gunfire, and the atmosphere of dread felt distant. Still, the game found an audience, selling over 2 million copies and becoming a cult favorite for its unique spin on the Raccoon City story. Operation Raccoon City didn't redefine Resident Evil, but it expanded its universe. It showed that the series could experiment, stepping outside survival horror to explore new perspectives. While it wasn't the critical hit Capcom hoped for, it paved the way for future spin-offs and inspired elements of Resident Evil, Resistance, and RE-verse. Today, it stands as a curious relic, a gritty, flawed, but fascinating what-if chapter in Resident Evil history. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't traditional. But Operation Raccoon City dared to turn the lens on the villains, and, in doing so, reminded players that in Raccoon City, no one ever truly survives. By 2012, Resident Evil stood at the height of its fame. The franchise had conquered horror, reinvented itself through action, and now aimed to deliver its most ambitious game yet. Resident Evil 6 promised everything: global chaos, multiple campaigns, returning heroes, and blockbuster-scale storytelling. But what began as a bold evolution would soon divide fans like never before. Capcom envisioned Resident Evil 6 as the ultimate cinematic experience, a game that blended Hollywood action with the legacy of survival horror. It was the largest Resident Evil ever made, featuring 4 interwoven campaigns, each with its own tone, characters, and gameplay style. Players could step into the shoes of Leon S. Kennedy, Chris Redfield, Jake Mueller, and Ada Wong, experiencing the outbreak from different corners of the world. From the streets of Tall Oaks to the ruins of China, Resident Evil 6 aimed to be a globe-trotting epic of infection and conspiracy. The game begins with a shocking event: the President of the United States infected and transformed into a bioorganic monster. Leon Kennedy, forced to make an impossible choice, becomes a fugitive alongside new partner Helena Harper. Meanwhile, Chris Redfield leads the BSAA in a desperate fight against global bioterrorism, haunted by his own guilt and loss. And Jake Mueller, the mysterious mercenary and son of Albert Wesker, discovers his blood may hold the key to humanity's survival. Their paths collide as a new threat emerges: the C-Virus, capable of turning humans into grotesque bioweapons on an unprecedented scale. Resident Evil 6 pushed the franchise deeper into full-blown action. Players could slide, roll, shoot while moving, and execute melee takedowns. Each campaign offered a different tone. Leon's was dark and horror-driven, Chris's focused on military combat, Jake's mixed action and survival, and Ada's delivered stealth and espionage. It was massive, cinematic, and packed with detail, but for many fans, it was too much. Critics praised the ambition but criticized the identity crisis. Was it horror, action, shooter? Resident Evil 6 tried to be everything, and in doing so, lost some of what made the series unique. Despite mixed reviews, Resident Evil 6 was a commercial success, selling over 10 million copies worldwide. It marked a turning point for Capcom. The feedback from players would inspire a complete course correction, one that returned the series to its horror roots in Resident Evil 7. Looking back, Resident Evil 6 stands as both a daring experiment and a lesson in ambition. It showed the limits of spectacle and reminded developers that fear, not firepower, was the true heart of the franchise. Resident Evil 6 was the moment when the series looked too far forward and had to look back to find itself again. A chaotic masterpiece to some, a misstep to others, but undeniably, a key chapter in the evolution of survival horror's most iconic name. Because sometimes, to truly survive, you have to lose yourself first. In 2015, Capcom released a sequel that returned Resident Evil to its roots: dark corridors, limited ammo, and real, creeping fear. This was Resident Evil Revelations 2, a game that balanced survival horror with emotional storytelling and reunited fans with one of the series' most beloved heroines, Claire Redfield. After the success of the first Revelations, Capcom saw an opportunity. Fans were craving a horror-driven experience after the action-heavy Resident Evil 6. So they decided to craft a sequel that focused on atmosphere, tension, and personal survival. But this time, the story would be told in a unique episodic format, released in weekly chapters, like a television series. Each episode delivered cliffhangers, multiple perspectives, and layers of mystery that kept players hooked from start to finish. Revelations 2 reintroduced Claire Redfield, now working for the anti-bioterror organization TerraSave. During a company event, Claire and her new recruit, Moira Burton, daughter of series veteran Barry Burton, are kidnapped and taken to a mysterious island prison. Meanwhile, Barry himself arrives on the island, searching for his missing daughter. He's joined by Natalia Corda, a strange young girl with psychic abilities who can sense enemies and hidden items. The dual narrative, Claire and Moira surviving in the present, Barry and Natalia uncovering the truth later, gave players two intertwined stories of horror and redemption. Capcom brought back the survival horror elements that fans missed: tight hallways, dim lighting, scarce ammunition, and grotesque enemies known as the Afflicted. The co-op system was also central. Each pair of characters had distinct abilities. Moira could use a flashlight to stun enemies and find hidden items. while Natalia could detect threats Barry couldn't see. This encouraged teamwork, tension, and strategic play. The game also featured Raid Mode, a fan-favorite bonus mode offering fast-paced, arcade-style action with RPG elements and unlockable characters. When Revelations 2 launched, critics praised its return to form. Fans loved the blend of old-school horror with modern gameplay and emotional storytelling. The episodic release format gave the game a steady stream of discussion and anticipation week after week. While some criticized its graphics and minor technical flaws, the atmosphere and writing more than made up for it. Resident Evil Revelations 2 proved that Capcom still understood the art of fear. It bridged the gap between classic horror and modern action, setting the stage for the revival seen in Resident Evil 7. Its storytelling, tone, and character-driven design reminded fans why they fell in love with the series in the first place. Even today, it stands as one of the most underrated entries, a chilling, emotional chapter in Resident Evil history. It wasn't the flashiest, it wasn't the biggest, but Revelations 2 brought back the terror that defined a generation. And it showed that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in the dark, they're the memories that never fade. In 2016, Capcom released a Resident Evil spin-off that no one quite expected. It wasn't survival horror. It wasn't even traditional action. It was something entirely different. A competitive, fast-paced shooter set in the Resident Evil universe. This was Resident Evil Umbrella Corps, and it became one of the most controversial entries in the series' long history. After years of experimenting with action-heavy gameplay, Capcom wanted to take the franchise in a new direction. They aimed to create a multiplayer shooter that blended tactical combat with Resident Evil's atmosphere and lore. The idea was bold. Teams of mercenaries fighting in zombie-infested arenas, using the undead as both obstacles and weapons. It was meant to be a celebration of Resident Evil's world, not a traditional horror experience. But for many fans, it strayed too far from what made the series iconic. Umbrella Corps featured 3v3 online matches with objectives like data recovery, point capture, and elimination. Players could use grappling hooks, melee attacks, and high-tech gear like the Zombie Jammer, a device that repelled undead unless damaged. Maps were small, intense, and filled with AI-controlled zombies that reacted dynamically to noise in combat. On paper, it sounded innovative. In practice, it was chaotic. The camera was tight, the controls clunky, and the maps overly confined. What was supposed to feel tactical often just felt frustrating. Despite being multiplayer-focused, Capcom tried to tie it into Resident Evil's lore. The game took place after the fall of Umbrella Corporation. Private military companies now fought over the remnants of Umbrella's technology and research. Classic locations like the Raccoon City Police Department and Tricell Labs made appearances, giving longtime fans a few nostalgic nods. But beyond those callbacks, Umbrella Corps felt disconnected from the series' core identity. When it launched, critics were harsh. They criticized the controls, shallow content, and lack of meaningful horror. Multiplayer servers struggled to stay populated, and technical issues plagued matches. Even devoted fans found little reason to stick around. Many called it one of Capcom's weakest Resident Evil titles ever made. Despite its flaws, Umbrella Corps did serve one purpose. It reminded Capcom what Resident Evil was really about. Fear, tension, isolation, not competitive firefights. The backlash from Umbrella Corps would push the company to rethink everything, leading directly into the horror renaissance of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard just 1 year later. In a strange way, Umbrella Corps failed, so the franchise could be reborn. It may not be remembered fondly, but it's still a part of Resident Evil's long, evolving history. A reminder that even the darkest experiments can light the way forward. Because sometimes, failure isn't the end, it's just another mutation. By 2017, the Resident Evil franchise had changed dramatically. Once known for survival horror and tension, it had shifted toward action-packed shooters. But fans missed the fear. They missed the darkness, the helplessness, the horror that made Resident Evil a legend. Capcom knew it was time to return to the roots, but in a way no one expected. That rebirth came in the form of Resident Evil 7, Biohazard. After the disappointment of Resident Evil 6, Capcom realized the series had lost its identity. Players wanted to be scared again. They wanted mystery, isolation, and survival. So, Capcom decided to reinvent the franchise from the ground up. The result was a game that embraced the old-school horror spirit, but with a first-person perspective. This bold move brought players closer to the terror than ever before. Resident Evil 7 begins in rural Louisiana. You play as Ethan Winters, a regular man searching for his missing wife, Mia. His search leads him to a decaying plantation owned by the terrifying Baker family. What starts as a rescue mission quickly spirals into a nightmare of madness and infection. The Bakers, Jack, Marguerite, and Lucas, became some of the most disturbing villains in Resident Evil history. Their twisted personalities and unkillable presence made every encounter a fight for survival. Unlike previous games, Resident Evil 7 focused on exploration, atmosphere, and resource management. Ammo was limited, healing was scarce, and every creaking floorboard made your heart race. The shift to first person made horror personal. You weren't just watching the fear, you were living it. The game was also built to support VR, making it one of the most immersive horror experiences ever created. Although it introduced new characters, Resident Evil 7 stayed tied to the main timeline. It revealed a new type of bioweapon called the Evelyn Mold, a virus capable of controlling minds. And in the game's final moments, longtime fans were shocked to see the return of Chris Redfield, linking this new story back to the franchise's legacy. Resident Evil 7, Biohazard was a massive success. Critics praised its atmosphere, storytelling, and return to true horror. Fans called it the best Resident Evil game in years. It sold over 12 million copies, proving that fear was still the heart of the series. More importantly, it restored faith in Capcom and set the stage for the future. Without Resident Evil 7, we may never have gotten Resident Evil Village or the modern remakes. Resident Evil 7 wasn't just a comeback, it was a resurrection. A reminder that sometimes, to survive, you have to go back to where the nightmare began. In 2019, Capcom did what many thought was impossible. They brought back one of the greatest survival horror games ever made and made it even better. This is the story of Resident Evil 2 Remake, a game that redefined what a remake could be and reignited the legacy of Resident Evil for a new generation. To understand the 2019 remake, we need to go back to 1998. The original Resident Evil 2 was a landmark in gaming history. It introduced players to Leon S. Kennedy, a rookie cop on his first day, and Claire Redfield, searching for her brother, Chris. Together, they faced the chaos of Raccoon City, a place consumed by the T-virus outbreak. With its tense atmosphere, cinematic cutscenes, and branching storylines, Resident Evil 2 became a defining moment for the PlayStation era. 2 decades later, fans begged Capcom for a modern remake. In 2015, producer Yoshiaki Hirabayashi confirmed it was finally happening. But this wasn't just going to be an HD remaster. Capcom wanted to completely rebuild the game from the ground up. Their goal was to preserve the soul of the original while transforming it into a state-of-the-art horror experience. Gone were the fixed camera angles and tank controls. In their place came the over-the-shoulder camera, inspired by Resident Evil 4. This change brought the fear closer. You were no longer watching the horror, you were inside it. The remake used Capcom's RE engine, delivering jaw-dropping visuals, lifelike lighting, and incredibly realistic gore. Every hallway dripped with tension. Every zombie felt unpredictable. And every shadow made your pulse quicken. The game perfectly balanced nostalgia with innovation. Classic locations like the Raccoon City Police Department were reimagined with new puzzles, new routes, and terrifying detail. Beloved enemies like the Lickers returned, deadlier than ever. And then there was Mr. X, the unstoppable tyrant who stalked players relentlessly through the halls. His heavy footsteps became one of the most chilling sounds in gaming. When Resident Evil 2 Remake launched, it was met with universal acclaim. Critics praised its atmosphere, storytelling, and stunning visuals. Fans loved how it honored the past while pushing horror forward. It sold over 12 million copies, won multiple Game of the Year awards, and set the new gold standard for video game remakes. It wasn't just a remake, it was a rebirth. Resident Evil 2 Remake proved that some nightmares are worth reliving. It captured everything we loved about the original and wrapped it in modern terror. A perfect blend of old and new, and a reminder of why Resident Evil will always be the king of survival horror. In 2020, just 1 year after the incredible success of Resident Evil 2 Remake, Capcom returned to Raccoon City. This time, the nightmare wasn't about surviving the outbreak. It was about escaping it. This is the story of Resident Evil 3 Remake, a fast, intense reimagining of Jill Valentine's desperate run from one of gaming's most iconic monsters. The original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was released in 1999. It took players back into the crumbling streets of Raccoon City, where Jill Valentine, a member of STARS, tried to flee the doomed city before it was wiped off the map. But what made it unforgettable was its towering villain, Nemesis. A relentless bioweapon that hunted Jill across every corner of the city, smashing through walls and roaring her name. For many, it was the most terrifying Resident Evil ever made. After Resident Evil 2 Remake shocked the gaming world, fans immediately started asking, "Where's Resident Evil 3?" In December 2019, Capcom revealed it was coming. Built on the same RE engine, the remake promised a full reimagining of Jill's story, faster, darker, and more cinematic than ever before. And once again, the team at Capcom wanted to modernize the experience without losing its heart. From the very first moment, Resident Evil 3 Remake is pure adrenaline. There's no slow build-up. The action explodes immediately, as Jill's apartment is destroyed by Nemesis. The chase begins, and it never really stops. The game reimagines key locations like downtown Raccoon City, the subway station, and the hospital, while introducing intense action and environmental destruction. Jill is joined by Carlos Oliveira, a member of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service who gets his own playable sections. Together, they fight to survive the chaos before Raccoon City's inevitable fall. Nemesis was redesigned with terrifying detail. He's faster, smarter, and more brutal than ever. Armed with a flamethrower and rocket launcher, he hunts Jill with unstoppable force. Unlike Mr. X from Resident Evil 2, Nemesis strikes without warning, often ambushing players mid-mission. Every encounter keeps you on edge, never knowing when he'll appear next. When Resident Evil 3 Remake released, it was praised for its visuals, voice acting, and relentless pacing. But some fans felt it was too short, missing key locations and moments from the 1999 version. Even so, it stood as a high-quality companion to Resident Evil 2 Remake, showcasing Capcom's mastery of survival horror storytelling. Together, the two remakes rebuilt the foundation of the franchise, setting the stage for the next evolution of the series. Resident Evil 3 Remake may have been faster and leaner than its predecessor, but it delivered one thing perfectly: fear in motion. It reminded players that, in Raccoon City, you can run all you want, but you can't escape the past. In 2020, alongside the release of Resident Evil 3 Remake, Capcom introduced something entirely new. A bold experiment that reimagined the horror of Resident Evil as a multiplayer survival test. It was called Resident Evil Resistance, a game that dared to turn fear into competition. And though it was often overshadowed by its single-player counterpart, its ambition was undeniable. Resident Evil Resistance wasn't a traditional entry in the series. It was an asymmetrical multiplayer spin-off, originally known during development as Project Resistance. The concept was simple but thrilling: 4 players working together to escape from one player-controlled villain known as the Mastermind. Each match became a test of strategy, teamwork, and nerves under pressure. Capcom introduced several masterminds, each representing a dark corner of Umbrella Corporation. There was Annette Birkin, who could unleash her mutated husband, William Birkin. Daniel Fabrin, a sadistic security officer using brute force to crush survivors. And Alex Wesker, known for her psychological traps and grotesque experiments. Later updates even added Nikolai Zinoviev, the cold-blooded mercenary from Resident Evil 3 Remake, who could call in Nemesis as a weapon. Each mastermind could deploy zombies, traps, cameras, and bioweapons, turning every corridor into a nightmare puzzle. The survivors, on the other hand, were normal people caught in Umbrella's web of experiments. Each one had unique abilities: healing, hacking, melee attacks, or buffs that helped the team endure. Characters like January Van Sant, Valerie Harmon, and Tyrone Henry became fan favorites for their personalities and cooperative playstyles. To escape, the survivors had to solve puzzles, fight off monsters, and outthink the mastermind before the timer ran out. It was a desperate race between human intelligence and Umbrella's control. Resistance was released in April 2020 as part of Resident Evil 3 Remake's package. It was ambitious, merging Resident Evil's horror with online competition, but reactions were mixed. Players praised its creativity and tension, yet criticized the balance between survivors and masterminds. Technical issues and a steep learning curve made it tough for casual fans to embrace. Still, its atmosphere, music, and lore-rich details were deeply appreciated by longtime fans. Though support for Resistance ended quietly, it left a lasting impression. It proved that Resident Evil could expand beyond its traditional formula into unpredictable, player-driven horror. And even if it didn't achieve the same success as the mainline entries, Resident Evil Resistance became a fascinating experiment in the franchise's evolution. Its DNA would later inspire Resident Evil Verse, continuing Capcom's effort to blend survival horror with online gameplay. In the end, Resident Evil Resistance wasn't about victory. It was about control: who held it, who lost it, and who could survive long enough to find freedom. In the world of Resident Evil, that fight never truly ends. In 2021, Capcom delivered one of the most ambitious entries in the franchise's history. A sequel that fused gothic horror, action, and mystery into a single, haunting experience. This is the story of Resident Evil Village, the 8th mainline game that redefined survival horror for a new generation. Resident Evil Village picks up several years after the events of Resident Evil 7, Biohazard. Ethan Winters, having survived the horrors of the Baker family, is living a quiet life with his wife Mia and their infant daughter, Rose. But peace never lasts in the Resident Evil universe. When a sudden attack led by Chris Redfield shatters their lives, Ethan is thrown into another nightmare. He awakens in a mysterious European village, frozen, isolated, and ruled by monsters. The village is unlike anything seen before in the series. A labyrinth of stone, houses, churches, and secrets, surrounded by snowy mountains and silence. It's controlled by 4 terrifying figures, each serving a shadowy master known as Mother Miranda. There's Lady Dimitrescu, the towering vampiric matriarch, Donna Beneviento, who manipulates reality through her dolls, Salvatore Moreau, a grotesque, mutated creature living in filth and sorrow, and Carl Heisenberg, a brutal engineer who commands machines with magnetic power. Each lord controls a distinct domain, a reflection of fear itself. Capcom blended first-person horror with the intensity of classic Resident Evil combat. Players crafted ammo, upgraded weapons, and explored freely, giving Village a sense of scale and discovery. The Merchant, known as the Duke, returned as a mysterious ally, offering supplies and cryptic wisdom. Beneath the surface, Village balanced terror and empowerment, pulling players between dread and determination. As Ethan fought through the nightmare, truths began to unravel. Mother Miranda's experiments, the origins of the mold, and even the truth about Ethan himself came to light. In a shocking twist, Ethan discovers he's not entirely human, but a product of the very bioweaponization he's been fighting against. His sacrifice, at the game's end, gave Resident Evil Village one of its most emotional conclusions: a father's final act of love to save his daughter. Released in May 2021, Resident Evil Village was met with widespread acclaim. Critics praised its storytelling, stunning visuals, and masterful blend of action and atmosphere. Lady Dimitrescu became an instant cultural icon, while the game's gothic setting reinvigorated the horror genre. Capcom proved once again that Resident Evil could evolve, honoring its past while shaping the future. And with its expansion, Shadows of Rose, the story continued, closing the Winters family chapter while hinting at what's next. Resident Evil Village wasn't just another entry. It was a statement, a reminder that fear, loss, and survival will always be at the heart of the series. In the Village, the nightmare may have ended, but for Resident Evil, the story is far from over. In 2022, Capcom released a multiplayer experiment that aimed to celebrate 25 years of survival horror, a project designed to bring together heroes and villains from across the franchise's history in one chaotic, deadly arena. This is the story of Resident Evil Verse, the multiplayer spin-off that divided fans but marked a bold step for the series. Verse was first announced in early 2021, intended as a bonus game bundled with Resident Evil Village. It was Capcom's attempt to capture the legacy of Resident Evil in a competitive format, fast-paced, over-the-top, and filled with nostalgia. Players would battle it out as iconic characters from the series, including Leon S. Kennedy, Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Ada Wong, and Hunk. Each character featured unique weapons, skills, and playstyles, staying true to their mainline counterparts. The concept behind Reverse was simple but clever. Up to 6 players fought in deathmatch-style arenas based on familiar locations like the Raccoon City Police Department. When a player died, they weren't out of the match, they transformed into a bioweapon. Collecting virus samples during gameplay determined which creature you'd become. You could respawn as terrifying enemies like a Hunter, Jack Baker, or even Nemesis. This transformation mechanic was meant to keep matches unpredictable, a mix of horror, action, and chaos. Originally scheduled for release in 2021, Verse faced several delays. Capcom postponed it multiple times to improve balance, performance, and stability. Fans grew skeptical, wondering if the project would ever see the light of day. Finally, in October 2022, Verse officially launched alongside the Resident Evil Village Gold Edition. Reception to Reverse was mixed at best. While fans appreciated the nostalgic roster and creature transformations, many criticized its limited content and repetitive gameplay. Technical issues, matchmaking problems, and lack of long-term support led to a divided player base. However, for some, it was a lighthearted celebration, a chance to step into the shoes of their favorite Resident Evil icons and battle it out in short, explosive sessions. Though Verse didn't achieve the lasting success Capcom hoped for, it represented something important: a willingness to experiment, to push Resident Evil beyond its traditional boundaries. It may not have been the horror masterpiece fans expected, but it served as a reminder of how enduring the franchise has become. From 1996 to today, Resident Evil continues to evolve, even in its strangest forms. Verse wasn't about fear, it was about legacy. A chaotic love letter to a world of survival horror that refuses to die. And in that way, even if imperfect, it still carries the spirit of Resident Evil. When talking about the history of Resident Evil 4 Remake, we have to start with the legacy of the original 2005 title. The original Resident Evil 4 wasn't just another entry in the franchise, it was a turning point for the entire gaming industry. By shifting from fixed camera angles to an over-the-shoulder perspective, it reinvented action survival horror and became one of the most influential titles of all time. Many modern action games, including Gears of War and The Last of Us, owe inspiration to its gameplay blueprint. It's story of Leon S. Kennedy searching for the U.S. president's daughter, Ashley Graham, while battling infected villagers under the control of Los Illuminados. Cemented unforgettable villains, characters, and set pieces that gamers still talk about decades later. After the success of Capcom's remakes of Resident Evil 2 in 2019 and Resident Evil 3 in 2020, fan expectations began to rise. If Capcom could reimagine earlier titles with such precision, could they also reimagine what many considered one of the greatest games ever made? The challenge was enormous. Unlike earlier entries that needed modernization, the original RE4 was still widely regarded as nearly flawless. Capcom's goal became clear: not to replace the original, but to reinterpret it, elevating every aspect while retaining the soul of the game. Development of Resident Evil 4 Remake began with a focus on atmosphere. The RE engine offered realistic lighting, detailed textures, and expressive facial animation, allowing the game to embrace a darker, more suspense-driven tone. The remake leaned harder into horror, amplifying the fear that the original sometimes traded for fast-paced action. Characters received expanded personalities and emotional depth. Ashley evolved from a defenseless escort into a more grounded and capable companion. Louise Sarah, once a brief side character, played a much larger narrative role, and Ada Wong's storyline gained emotional complexity. Gameplay updates were designed to modernize combat without losing the recognizable feel of RE4. The ability to move while aiming, stealth options, and enemy interruption mechanics added new layers to strategy. The knife transformed from a simple tool into a core system, now capable of parrying attacks but limited by durability. Iconic locations like the village, castle, and island returned, but were redesigned with new layouts, enemy encounters, and surprises that kept returning fans on edge. Classic boss fights were reimagined with cinematic detail and new attack patterns. When Resident Evil 4 Remake launched in March 2023, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Critics praised the balance between honoring the original and daring to evolve it. Fans welcomed the richer story, fine-tuned mechanics, and stunning presentation. The remake didn't just modernize a masterpiece, it proved that even the most acclaimed games can grow when reimagined with passion, respect, and innovation. And there you have it, the full journey through the history of every Resident Evil game. From the terrifying beginnings in the Spencer Mansion to the modern reinventions and experimental spin-offs, the series has never stopped evolving. Resident Evil isn't just a collection of games. It's a cultural phenomenon that has shaped survival horror, inspired countless creators, and terrified millions of players around the world. Whether you're a longtime fan or new to the series, understanding its history shows just how far this franchise has come and hints at the horrors yet to come. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next deep dive into your favorite games.